It happened in the dark, in the kind of blackout that swallows a whole street at once, and it lasted 4 seconds before either of us understood what we'd done. My name is Jason Cole. I'm 27. I install home security systems for a living, which is a little funny considering I never saw this one coming. Up until that night, Ava Reyes had been exactly one thing to me for 9 years. My best friend. Not my sister's friend, not a friend of a friend, mine. We met freshman year of college in a lecture hall that smelled like old carpet, and somehow we just stuck. She knew my coffee order before I did. I knew which songs made her cry, and pretended I didn't notice when they came on. We had been that pair people assumed were dating for almost a decade, and were always a little disappointed to learn we weren't. We just laughed it off every time. "It's not like that," we'd say. "We're just close." That was true right up until the lights went out. That night, we were at my apartment, the two of us and a bottle of wine that was maybe a little too much wine for a Tuesday, watching a movie that neither of us was really watching. Ava had her feet in my lap the way she always did, scrolling her phone, laughing at something and refusing to share what it was. The storm outside had been building for an hour, thunder rattling the windows, rain coming down like the sky had a grudge. I remember thinking it felt cozy, safe, the kind of ordinary night we'd had 100 times before. Then the power cut, all at once, no warning, no flicker first, just black. Ava yelped and grabbed for something, and what she grabbed was me, my arm at first, then my shoulder, laughing at herself for being startled, saying something about how she hated the dark, always had, since she was a kid. I was laughing too, telling her to hold on, I'd find my phone for a flashlight. I stood up too fast. She stood up at the same time, closer than either of us meant to be, and in the dark, moving toward where I thought her voice was, I misjudged the distance by about 6 inches. My hand found her jaw instead of her shoulder, and before either of us could correct course, my mouth found hers. For 1 full second, neither of us moved, not because we meant to stay there, but because the shock of it froze us both in place, like our bodies needed a moment to catch up to what had already happened. Her hands had come up to my chest, not pushing me away, just resting there, still. I could feel her breath catch, and then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, neither of us pulled back right away. It wasn't the plan. It wasn't supposed to happen at all. But for about 4 seconds, in a blackout on a Tuesday night, 9 years of never once crossing that line, quietly stopped mattering. Then my phone's flashlight clicked on from the couch cushion where it had fallen, throwing light across both our faces, and we jumped apart like the room had caught fire. "Oh my God," Ava said, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought you were... I don't even know what I thought." I was already backing up, hitting the edge of the coffee table, apologizing just as fast. "That was me. That was completely on me. I misjudged where you were. I didn't mean to. We were both talking over each other, both red-faced even in the dim light, both very suddenly aware of the shape of the other person's mouth, in a way we had spent 9 years successfully not being aware of." The power came back about 90 seconds later, the lamps flickering on like nothing had happened, like the whole apartment hadn't just witnessed something neither of us had a name for. Ava laughed, too high, too fast, the laugh she used when she wanted a moment to be smaller than it was. "Well," she said, "that's a story for the group chat." "Don't you dare," I said. "I'm kidding. Obviously, I'm not telling anyone that." She grabbed her purse off the counter with hands that weren't quite steady. "I should go before the storm gets worse." "Ava, it's fine, Jason. It was an accident." We both know it was an accident. She said it like she was trying to convince the room, not just me. Then she left, and I stood in my apartment for a long time afterward, replaying 4 seconds I hadn't planned for and couldn't stop thinking about. We didn't talk for 3 days. Not really. A few texts that skimmed the surface on purpose, the kind where you're both very carefully not mentioning the thing that's sitting in the room with you even through a phone screen. "Did you find your umbrella?" "Yeah, it was under the seat." "Cool." Nothing about the blackout. Nothing about the 4 seconds that had rearranged something in my chest without asking my permission first. I told myself that was fine. That was how you handled an accident between two people who valued a 9-year friendship more than one confusing kiss. You let it go quiet. You let time do the smoothing over. I was very good at lying to myself. On the fourth day, she called. Not texted, called, which she almost never did, and I picked up before the second ring, which told me everything about how well my quiet was actually going. "Hey," she said. Her voice had a careful quality to it, like she'd rehearsed the first line. "Can I come over? I need to talk to you about something, and I don't want to do it over text." My stomach dropped in a way that felt like both dread and something else I didn't want to examine too closely. "Yeah, of course." She showed up 20 minutes later in leggings and one of my old college hoodies she'd apparently never given back. Hair pulled up messy, no makeup, the version of Ava that only showed up when she'd stopped performing for anyone. She sat on the far end of the couch, farther than she usually sat, and I understood that the distance was intentional. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about it," she said, not looking at me, looking at her hands instead. The kiss. "I know it was an accident, I know that, but I keep replaying it, and I don't understand why an accident is the thing I can't put down." I sat very still. "Ava, let me finish, because if I stop, I won't say the rest of it." She took a breath. "I've spent 9 years telling myself that what we have is better than what other people have, because we never had to risk it. No awkward first dates. No wondering if you liked me back. None of it. Just easy. And I told myself easy was the same as enough." She finally looked up at me. Then 4 seconds in the dark happened, and it wasn't easy at all. It was the least easy thing that's happened to me in years. And I can't stop wondering what it means that an accident felt more real than anything I've done on purpose in a long time. I didn't say anything right away because I was scared that whatever came out of my mouth would either say too much or not enough, and there was no version of this conversation where almost was going to be good enough anymore. "I've thought about you like that before," I finally said. "Not just that night. Before that night. I never let myself sit with it, because you were my best friend, and some lines feel like fences you just don't climb, no matter how many times you think about climbing them." Her breath caught, quiet but audible. "How long? Honestly?" "Longer than I'd like to admit." I looked at her. "I told myself it was easier to have you in my life as my best friend forever than to risk having you for a little while and then not at all." Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise, more like a piece finally sliding into place. "That's exactly what I've been telling myself too," she said. Word for word, basically. We sat there for a moment in a silence that felt different from the one that had followed the accident. That first silence had been panic, two people scrambling to undo something. This one was quieter, steadier, like the room itself was giving us space to catch up to what we'd both apparently known separately for a while. "So what happens now?" I asked, because I don't think we can go back to the version of us that pretends that night didn't happen. "I've tried for 3 days and it hasn't worked." Ava was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in her hands, a habit I recognized from every hard conversation we'd ever had. Then she looked at me, steady, decided in a way I hadn't seen from her all week. "I want you to kiss me again," she said. "On purpose this time. No blackout, no accident, no excuse either of us can hide behind afterward. I want to know if it felt like that because it was unexpected, or if it felt like that because it's actually real. And I need to know before I let myself fall any further into wondering." I stared at her a long moment, my heart doing something stupid and fast in my chest. "You're asking me to kiss you." "I'm asking you to kiss me and mean it," she said. "Because I don't think I can survive 9 years of easy anymore. Not after 4 seconds of something that felt like the realest thing I've had in years." I should have taken a beat. I should have thought it through the way I thought through everything else in my life. Instead, I reached over, tucked a piece of hair back from her face, the same motion I'd probably wanted to make 100 times over 9 years, without ever letting myself notice the wanting, and I kissed her. Slowly this time, on purpose. No storm, no darkness, no excuse hanging over either of our heads, just the two of us, finally admitting out loud what an accident had already told us in the dark. When we pulled back, her eyes were bright, and she let out a breath like she'd been holding it since the blackout. "Okay," she said quietly. "That wasn't an accident." "No," I agreed. "That one I meant completely." She laughed then. That real laugh, low and surprised at herself. The one she almost never let anyone see because it meant she'd stopped guarding something. 9 years, she said, shaking her head. 9 years of easy. And it turns out the thing I actually wanted was never easy at all. Would you have wanted it if it was easy? I asked. She thought about that seriously, the way she thought about everything that actually mattered to her. No, she said finally. I don't think I would have trusted it. That answer settled something in me I hadn't realized was still unsettled. Word got out the way it always does, which is to say, Ava told her sister Priya over coffee 2 days later, and Priya called me within the hour, laughing so hard she could barely get a sentence out. You kissed her by accident in a blackout, Priya said, and then she asked you to do it again on purpose. That is, hands down, the most Ava thing that has ever happened to Ava. I'm not going to argue with that. You'd better not mess this up, Jason. She's been talking about you since college and pretending it was nothing. I've had to hear about it for 9 years. I hadn't known that. I sat with it for a long moment after we hung up. The idea that the two of us had been circling each other for almost a decade, both convinced the other one hadn't noticed, both wrong the entire time. Our first real date, if you could call it that, was 2 weeks later, at the same restaurant where we used to get lunch after class in college, back when neither of us would have admitted there was anything more than friendship sitting quietly between us. Ava showed up in a dress I'd never seen her wear before, and when she caught me noticing, she just smiled and said, I figured if we're doing this for real, I should actually try. You've never had to try with me. I know, she said, sliding into the booth across from me instead of beside me, like the space between us mattered differently now, worth closing on purpose. That's kind of the whole problem, isn't it? 9 years of never trying because it never felt like we needed to. We talked for 3 hours that night, about things we'd never quite said out loud even after 9 years of talking about everything. About the guy she'd almost married in her mid-20s, and the quiet relief she'd felt when it ended. A relief she'd never told anyone the real reason for until that night, sitting across from me. About the reason I'd never seriously dated anyone longer than a year, a reason I hadn't let myself look at directly until a blackout forced my hand. Can I ask you something? She said, near the end of the night, turning her water glass slowly between her hands. Anything. That night, before the lights went out, before any of it. What were you thinking, right in that second when the room went dark? I thought back to it, to the flash of panic, and then, underneath the panic, something quieter. Honestly, I was thinking I hoped I'd find you first, before I even knew what I meant by it. She smiled, soft, a little disbelieving. I was thinking the same thing. I just didn't let myself understand what I meant by it either. Not until it already happened. Funny how that works, I said. 9 years of not letting ourselves understand something, and it took the power going out to finally say it without words. I don't think it's funny, she said. I think it's just true. We were always careful in exactly the wrong places. We walked back to my apartment that night the long way, past the building where we'd met freshman year, past the coffee shop where she used to make me wait in line because she refused to order for herself in a crowd, past 9 years of small, ordinary moments that had quietly built into this one. When we reached my door, she stopped and looked at me under the porch light the same way she had that night in the blackout, except this time there was nothing accidental about it. I keep thinking about how close we came to never finding out, she said. If the power hadn't gone out that night, if I hadn't grabbed for you in the dark, we might have just kept being easy at each other for another 9 years. We might have, I admitted, but I don't think it would have stayed easy forever. I think eventually something would have made us look at it. The blackout just got there first. She reached up and kissed me then, unprompted, no accident, no request. Just two people who'd finally stopped pretending that safe and real were the same thing. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine for a second. The way you do when you want a moment to last a little longer than it's built to. For the record, she said, I'm glad the storm knocked the power out that night. For the record, I said, so am I, even though I've apologized for it about 11 times since. You don't have to apologize anymore, she said. I asked you to do it again. That kind of cancels out the accident. It wasn't all easy after that, even if the hard part had already happened in the dark. 2 weeks after our first real date, Ava called me sounding smaller than I'd heard her in a long time. Can you come over? She said. I don't want to talk about it on the phone. I was at her apartment in 15 minutes, and when she opened the door, I could tell she'd been crying, the kind of crying she usually did alone, and cleaned up before anyone saw. "What happened?" I asked. She handed me her phone instead of answering right away. It was a message from Marcus, the guy she'd almost married 2 years earlier. The one she'd told me about at dinner. The one whose ending she'd called a relief. He'd heard, apparently, through some mutual friend, that she was seeing her best friend now, and he'd written something short and needling about how convenient it must be to finally settle for something safe instead of something real. "He doesn't get to say that," I said, handing the phone back. "He doesn't get an opinion on us at all." "I know that," she said. "Logically, I know that. But some ugly little part of me heard it, and wondered if he had a point. If this is easy because it's right, or if it's easy because it's just familiar, and I'm scared of anything that isn't." I sat down across from her, the same way she'd sat across from me at the restaurant weeks earlier, giving her the space to get to the rest of it on her own. "You asked me that same question the night you asked me to kiss you again," I said. "You asked if it felt real, or if it just felt unexpected. Do you still not know the answer?" "I know the answer," she said quietly. "I think I'm just scared of how much I know it. It's easier to let one bitter text from an ex needle at me than to admit I've never been surer of anything in my life, because being sure means I can actually lose this now. Before, when we were just friends, there was nothing to lose. Now there's everything to lose." I understood that fear better than I wanted to admit, because I'd been carrying a version of it myself for 9 years. The reason I'd never let myself look directly at what I felt for her until a blackout forced my hand. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not because of one text from a guy who had 2 years with you and still managed to lose you. I've had 9 years of watching you be more yourself around me than you are around anyone else, and I'm not walking away from that because it finally has a name." Ava was quiet for a long moment, turning that over. Then she looked up at me, steadier than she'd been since I walked in. "Say that again, the part about 9 years. 9 years of you being more yourself around me than anyone else," I said. "That's not something Marcus gets to touch. That's not something one ugly text gets to undo." She let out a breath, something in her shoulders finally loosening. "I deleted his number," she said. "Before you got here, actually. I just needed to hear someone else say it wasn't nothing." "It was never nothing," I said. "It just took us 9 years and a power outage to stop pretending otherwise." She didn't bring Marcus up again after that night, and neither did I. But something had shifted between us in a good way, the kind of shift that comes from surviving a small test together instead of avoiding it. Priya told me later that Ava had spent 2 years after Marcus convinced herself that wanting something safe made her broken somehow, like real love was supposed to come with more risk attached than comfort. It took watching her almost talk herself out of the one thing that had ever actually felt both safe and real at the same time, for her to finally understand those two things weren't opposites after all. We told our families a month later, at a dinner that started tense, and ended with my mother laughing so hard she had to put her fork down. 9 years, she said, shaking her head, looking between the two of us. 9 years. I've been asking you both when you were finally going to figure it out. And it takes a thunderstorm to get there. In my defense, Ava said, we didn't exactly plan it that way. Nobody plans the real ones, my mother said. They just happen, and then you're smart enough or lucky enough to not talk yourself back out of it afterward. Priya raised her glass across the table, still grinning. 2 accidents that turn out to be the least accidental thing that's ever happened to either of you. Everyone laughed. Ava squeezed my hand under the table, and I thought about how strange it was that the truest thing that had ever happened between us had started with something neither of us meant to do at all. A year later, on the anniversary of that storm, I proposed to her in my apartment, lights off on purpose this time, 1 candle burning on the counter so she could actually see the ring. She laughed through tears when she realized what was happening, told me I'd ruined the moment a little by making her cry before I even finished the question, and said yes before I'd gotten all the way through it anyway. You know, she said afterward, still catching her breath, if the power hadn't gone out that night, none of this happens. Probably not, I agreed. That's a strange thing to be grateful for, a blackout. I'm not grateful for the blackout, I said. I'm grateful you had the guts to ask me to do it again, instead of letting us both pretend the accident never happened. Most people would have let it go quiet. Most people don't get 9 years of easy and a life-changing power outage in the same relationship, she said, smiling against my shoulder. No, I agreed. That part was just us. We got married that spring. Small ceremony, close friends only. The kind of wedding two people plan when they've already spent 9 years learning everything about each other and don't need a big show to prove it's real. During the toast, Priya stood up with her glass in hand and said, in front of everyone, I watched these two spend almost a decade insisting they were just friends, while the rest of us could see exactly what was going on. It took a blackout to get them to admit it. 9 years and one power outage, everybody. Everyone laughed. Ava leaned in close enough that only I could hear her over the noise. Say it again, she whispered, echoing the words from that very first night in my apartment. That it wasn't an accident. It wasn't, I whispered back. The first one might have been. Every single one since has been exactly on purpose. She kissed me right there in front of everyone. No darkness to hide behind, no excuse left standing between us. Just two people who had finally stopped mistaking easy for enough. Have you ever had something happen by accident that turned out to be the truest thing that ever happened to you? And would you have had the nerve to ask for it again, on purpose, the way Ava did? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.